Bien, bonjour et bienvenue à notre rendez-vous de midi. Nous sommes le lundi 6 novembre. Désolé pour les quelques minutes de retard, mais comme vous le savez, la présidente vient de prononcer un discours que nous étions en train de suivre, comme je l'imagine, un certain nombre d'entre vous. Donc nous allons commencer nos annonces d'aujourd'hui avec l'agenda de la présidente pour cette semaine, étant donné que nous n'avons pas eu notre réunion de midi vendredi dernier. Donc, comme je viens de le dire, vous l'avez vu, la présidente a prononcé ce matin un discours à la conférence des ambassadeurs de l'UE 2023, ici à Bruxelles. Demain, elle recevra Sa Majesté le roi Abdullah II ibn al-Hussein, roi du royaume hachémite de Jordanie, ici au Berlaymont. Plus tard dans la journée, elle recevra le groupe de travail Global Board Ready Women. Ne me demandez pas de traduire ça en français. Mercredi, la présidente présidera la réunion du collège, ici à Bruxelles, et elle participera également au débat en séance plénière du Parlement européen sur les conclusions du Conseil européen des 26 et 27 octobre. Et dans la soirée, toujours mercredi, la présidente recevra Mark Rutte, Premier ministre des Pays-Bas. Jeudi, la présidente participera à la conférence internationale sur l'aide humanitaire pour la population civile de Gaza, organisée par le président de la République française, Emmanuel Macron, donc à Paris. Plus tard dans la journée, la présidente sera à Berlin pour prononcer un discours à l'occasion du 75e anniversaire de la Banque de développement Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau. Enfin, dimanche, la présidente rencontrera à Stuttgart la table ronde européenne des industriels, connue en anglais sous son sigle ERT, European Round Table of Industrialists. Donc un agenda très chargé comme vous pouvez le voir. J'appelle maintenant Balázs à me rejoindre sur le podium pour une annonce sur notre soutien humanitaire à Gaza.
Indeed, so as announced by the President earlier today, the EU is further increasing its humanitarian aid to people in Gaza by 25 million euros. So this brings the total EU humanitarian assistance for Palestinians this year to over 100 million euro. This new assistance will be deployed as ever through humanitarian partner organizations, allowing them to provide life-saving assistance, in particular focusing on water, sanitation, health and food items. Let me also recall that the EU has also launched a humanitarian air bridge operation consisting of a total of 8 flights in aid to the people affected by the crisis. 6 of these flights, carrying over 260 tons of aid, have already reached Egypt. You will find more information in our daily news.
Thank you very much. So indeed, we've gone from 25 million to 100 million, so we have quadrupled our aid in the space of a few weeks. Now I would like to give the floor to Christian. We published yesterday a statement on the latest anti-Semitic incidents in Europe in the past weeks, and we would like to recall it here today.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, we issued a statement on recent anti-Semitic incidents in Europe yesterday, and let me quote some elements from this statement. The spike of anti-Semitic incidents across Europe has reached extraordinary levels in the last few days, reminiscent of some of the darkest times in history. European Jews today are again living in fear. We have seen a resurgence of anti-Semitic incidents and rhetoric in the European Union and worldwide. Molotov cocktails thrown on a synagogue in Germany, Stars of David sprayed on residential buildings in France, a Jewish cemetery desecrated in Austria, Jewish stores and synagogues attacked in Spain, demonstrators chanting hate slogans against Jews. In these difficult times, the EU stands by its Jewish communities. We condemn these despicable acts in the strongest possible terms. They go against everything that Europe stands for, against our core values and our way of life. We have to push back against this rise in anti-Semitism, as well as the rise in anti-Muslim hatred that we have been witnessing over the past weeks, which has no place in Europe. In cooperation with Member States, we will continue to step up security measures In parallel, we are stepping up the enforcement of relevant legislation to ensure online platforms react swiftly and effectively to anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim content online, be it terrorist content, hate speech, or disinformation. It is our shared responsibility as Europeans to call out hate in all its forms and stand up against it. You'll find the daily news item also on this with the link to the full statement. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Christian. Cela clôture nos annonces pour aujourd'hui et nous pouvons passer à vos questions. Yes.
Merci, Eric. Can we expect to get under embargo on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning the enlargement progress report?
Hebdo has not even taken place yet. Sorry, I was interrupted there. Not because of the sensitivity of the issue, I hope. As I said, Hebdo has not taken place yet. It will take place this afternoon, so we will announce media arrangements tomorrow after the conclusion of Hebdo. Other issues for us today? Yes.
Hi, Geneva from The National. Could you tell us a bit more about the meeting tomorrow between Ursula von der Leyen and the King of Jordan? Why is he coming? What they're going to talk about? Is it about Gaza? Thanks.
Well, the President and the King of Jordan have met already on a number of occasions, and the President, in her own speech today, has said, and I quote, "Tomorrow I will welcome King Abdallah of Jordan to Brussels to offer all our support to his country." So obviously the visit will be marked by the current international context in the region. Any other questions for us today? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Turkish News Agency, Anadolu. A question on Gaza. There's an ongoing humanitarian tragedy in Gaza right now. I would like to remind you that the number of children died in Gaza is around 5,000 as of today. Only 2 days ago, one of my colleagues, Anadolu Agency cameraman, lost his 4 children and 3 siblings in the Israeli bombing. So Israel has been hitting hospitals and schools, and you have been saying that, repeatedly said that Israel should abide by the international humanitarian law. Do you think this is in line with the international humanitarian law?
Thank you. Indeed, we have been saying very loud and clear that Israel, in the wake of the terrible attacks of 7th of October, has the right to defend itself, and that it must do so in respect of international law and international humanitarian law, and we will continue to say this. Obviously, we have no specific comment on specific elements or events on the ground. Let me remind you on top, please, and this is something that I'm going to repeat every time, the press room is not here to make statements, okay? It is here to ask questions. Now, obviously, we deplore all loss of life. We have been saying this extremely strongly since the beginning of the crisis, and this applies both to civilian lives lost in Gaza, to civilian lives that were lost in Israel in the attacks on the 7th of October. Follow up?
Yes, please. This was a question, not a statement, but also another question. I'm sure the EU wants to revive the Middle East peace process, but HRVP Borrell just said that it is not within reach today. So what are you doing to revive the peace process? That's the question.
So the President has actually mentioned quite extensively this issue in the speech which he has just pronounced in front of the ambassadors, and I would invite you to read the speech which we have just published. You know that there has been a peace day that was organized indeed also by the HRVP at the UN very recently, and the President has said herself that we will engage ourselves as much as possible in all efforts to reach a lasting and viable solution to the process. But clearly it's not just on the European Commission that this effort must rest, but we will play our full part in all efforts in this regard. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. There have been a number of statements made by senior ministers in the Israeli cabinet and Israeli generals that certainly sound genocidal. For example, Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. I think another minister this weekend said it should be nuked. Are we really going to stand back passively as a government that admits to genocidal activity, does what it says it's going to do? We can see it as the figures that have just been mentioned, the number of children, the number of people who have been killed, and also, you know, infrastructure from fishing boats to universities being blown up. Yes, you're increasing the aid for humanitarian aid, but don't you think you need to do something while genocide is being committed to their own acknowledgement, to say that Europe should respond in terms of its trade relations, in terms of sanctions, in terms of criminal procedures supporting criminal intent? I mean, we all feel the deepest sympathy towards Israel, to what happened on the 7th of October. It was an atrocity. But are we going to stand by when nothing is done about genocide?
Sorry, your question referred to statements by an Israeli minister. As you know, we do not comment on statements by individuals. What I would refer you to is what the President has just set out in her speech to the ambassadors on the fact that we do need a lasting solution to the conflict, and she set out a certain number of principles. Let me remind you what it is that she said in this context. The first is that Gaza can be no safe haven for terrorists. I'm not going to read you the extract of all her speech, but to give you the points, the basic principles that she has set out and which structure our thinking and our action on this. So first of all, Gaza cannot be a safe haven for terrorists, and this is something that everybody accepts. The question is how we can ensure that this happens. Different ideas are being discussed, she said, including an international peace force under UN mandate. The second basic principle she mentioned, the President mentioned, is that Hamas cannot control or govern Gaza, that there should be only one Palestinian Authority and one Palestinian state. The third is that there can be no long-term Israeli security presence in Gaza. The fourth is that there should be no forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. All right, so I think that is very clear in relation to to the question that you were asking. And finally, that there can be no sustained blockade of Gaza, that any future Palestinian state must be viable also from an economic point of view. So those are the basic principles on which the Commission is working when it comes to finding a solution to the conflict. And as you can clearly see from these principles, it includes, obviously, a viable Gaza Strip with its inhabitants able to develop, to live their lives in the Gaza Strip, also from a viable economic point of view. Any other questions for us on this today? I look at Interactio. Hussein.
Yes, Eric, thank you very much. And my question is, today the president was talking about the future after the war in Gaza, which you already mentioned. Isn't it still early to talk about the future of Gaza while the war is going on? And a question from people here in Brussels in the demonstrations and also on social media, I hear every day, how many lives of civilians need to be taken by Israeli to EU to call for immediate ceasefire? Thank you.
I think the position, on your last question, the European Council has set out the EU's position on this a week ago, a little over a week ago, and I invite you to read the conclusions of that European Council. That is the position of the European Union as we speak. And indeed, as to your first question, the President herself said that the principles which I have just mentioned may look overambitious as the war still rages on, but we must spare no effort to keep the hope alive, to find a lasting solution based on two states, living side by side in peace and security. So yes, the conflict is indeed ongoing, and it is a terrible conflict, but it is extremely important that we look to the future. By the way, as we have been doing as well in the context of the conflict in Ukraine. So we are preparing for the future, even as we deal with the immediate consequences. Angela, I believe you had a question as well.
Yes, hi, thanks for the opportunity. My question is about the funds. The President has announced more funds for Gaza. As some weeks ago you announced a revision of the funds for the Palestinian Authority. I know that humanitarian funds are not included in the revision, but can you explain and also if there is any update on the revision of the funds? Thanks.
Well, Angela, there's not much to explain. You've given all the elements in your question. Indeed, humanitarian aid is excluded from the review. We are increasing humanitarian aid very quickly in view of the developments on the ground. The review is currently ongoing, and I have no new information to provide you with on this. Okay, Hussein, you had a follow-up? I still see your hand raised. Give you
yes,
one
exactly. Thank you, Eric. For the call of humanitarian pause, on the ground we see both sides, Israel and Hamas, don't respect or positively answered your call. So what's the next? Did you receive any answer by Israeli authorities that they are not going to announce any corridors or pauses?
I don't have any specific information on these contacts. As I said, the President will be participating in a conference organized by the French President on Thursday on humanitarian aid for the civilian population in Gaza. This will certainly be an opportunity to discuss this issue. Okay. Last question on this? Perhaps not.
It was about the proposal in Mrs. von der Leyen's speech this morning about an international peace force under UN mandate. I just wanted to ask about that in relation to the EU's monitoring program at the border that it used to have between 2005 and 2007, and the fact that she also said that Hamas cannot stay in Gaza. Is there a possibility then that you envision Hamas being pushed out of Gaza, a UN force coming in to kind of control the space, and maybe the EU monitoring again the border crossing if Hamas is out? Because I understand you have a policy of no contact with the group. So I'm just kind of wondering if there's any future for this mission, since it was renewed this year, in the context of what Mrs. von der Leyen said this morning. Thank you.
So you're referring to the EU Border Assistance Mission to Rafah, right? EU-BAM Rafah. So my understanding is that we stand ready to redeploy to the Rafah crossing point as soon as conditions allow, subject to a decision by the 27 EU member states and the agreement of the parties on the ground. This is what I can say on this. I have no further comment on the other parts of the President's statement related to the mission or peace force under UN mandate at this stage. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Eric. It's not about the war between Israel and Hamas, but another question was raised by the President in her speech this morning when she talked about Ukraine and how Russia has failed until now in this war of aggression in Ukraine. And she said that instead, for example, NATO has been vitalized with two new member states, two new members. But I suppose that must be a mistake because it's only Finland until now, while Sweden is still waiting for both Turkey and Hungary to ratify its application. And that is my question, because it seems that Hungary complained about some old, let's say, media article or some years ago that Sweden was criticizing the government there. But I suppose that Sweden only, let's say, repeats the same position as all EU, that the government there is undermining the rule of law and independence of judiciary. So my question is it time, for example, now for EU to express its support for Sweden's NATO application, or is it still, do you still see it as a bilateral issue between Sweden and Hungary? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Look, the accession of a country to NATO is something for NATO and its members, not for the European Union, obviously. It is a completely different organization. It was certainly not a mistake that the President said two new members, even if, as you quite rightly mentioned, the ratification process for one of the new members is not yet complete, but there have been decisions that it will become a member pending a ratification by the different members of the alliance. That's all I can say on this issue. Okay, let me close the Foreign Affairs chapter with this and move on to any other issues that you might have today. Okay, I see that international... Catherine. Prolong the fun.
Thank you. And maybe you wouldn't editorialise my question or anybody else's when you accept questions. You mentioned the statement of Vice President Shinas yesterday about anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim behaviour and condemning that, and that's welcome. I mean, it's a bit of a pity that anti-Muslim bigotry seems to be an afterthought in that statement thrown in. But today I see that X, formerly known as Twitter, has renewed the presence of two people who are associated with anti-Muslim bigotry on the site, on that platform. They were removed permanently, allegedly, in 2020. And I'm just concerned that, we had great hopes when the Digital Services Act came into operation that there would be swift action to deal with this sort of bigotry. And yet we don't really see that. I mean, can we see, are we going to see more swift responses to this activity? And another thing that came out in the recent days is that how many people they have looking at moderating each language. And there are very, very few for many European languages, which must be a concern with European elections on the horizon. So would it be possible to give us an update on that? Thank you.
I don't see Johannes here, so we will have to come back to you. Do you know that the Commission has been in close touch with X on issues related to moderation of the content? So it is definitely something that we are acting upon, not just monitoring, but actually acting upon vis-à-vis X. But we can come back to your specific question later. Let me make the point on your first comment on editorializing questions. And I'm sorry to have to say this again, but this was actually raised by a number of journalists as well. Okay? I will not refrain from ensuring that this place, this press room, remains a place where we do not have individual views expressed by members of the press, which is, by the way, what you just did in your question as well, but that there are questions addressed to us, so that we do not have debates in the press room, but a question and answer session. And I will certainly continue to do that. Okay. I see no other questions for us today. I do have one hand raised in Interaction. Nikolai. But as I say, Johannes not being here today, we will come back to any individual questions on the DSA. But go ahead. Sorry, perhaps on something else.
Yes. Yes, thank you. No, thank you. Nikolai Nielsen, Observer. So last week, Austria had apparently signed an agreement with the UK to possibly offshore asylum to Rwanda pending a UK case. And I was wondering to what extent such an agreement or such intentions are feasible under EU law. To what extent is it feasible under EU law to offshore asylum to Rwanda? Is this something that Austria could do? Thanks.
Okay, a question for Anita.
Hello, Nikolai. Our position is clear on this, and I think we have exchanged several times. Currently, EU asylum law applies only to asylum applications made on the territory of a member state, but not outside.
Okay, thank you very much. This time I really see no further questions, so we will meet again tomorrow. Thank you very much.